So my name is Ngunan Adamu and I am your host for this evening's session. Thank you for joining us this evening for a joint panel discussion by Savera UK and Zonta Club London, tackling the harmful ways that culture is wrongly conflated with human rights abuses against women and girls. So this event, as you know, is called Culture is Beautiful, No Excuse for Abuse. We aim to discuss how cultures and culture beliefs, including religion, are used as an excuse for male violence against women and girls and harmful practices, as well as the misinformation that perpetuates this belief, and how such harmful practices are in fact a violation of human rights that need to be tackled. So on the panel, we have Mansi Mehta, who is Deputy Director of Global Cause Partnerships at UNICEF USA. We've got Dr. Elham Manea, Associate Professor at the Political Science Institute, University of Zurich. We have Nazir Afzal, OBE, Savera UK patron and former Chief Prosecutor for North West England. We have Afrah Qassim, CEO and founder of Savera UK. And we have Britt Gustawsson, Treasurer of Zonta Club London. Now, before we start, we have a few housekeeping rules before, just to get us, making sure we keep things polite and keep things moving. So we have the Q&A box where you can submit your questions, which will be responded to in the Q&A session later in the event. If your question is for someone specific, please indicate this by including their name. And also apologies sent by Leila Hussein, OBE, who unfortunately can't join us today due to unforeseen circumstances, but she sends her apologies and she will join us for a future event. And without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Nazir Afzal, OBE, who's Savera UK patron and former Chief Prosecutor for the North West. Oh, Nazir, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Ngunan. You can hear me now, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Delighted once again to be here with you. Well, here with you. I'm here, you're there. But you know what I mean. And to be able to demonstrate, I think, how important the work Savera is and working with partners, not just across this country, but across the world, in tackling this issue, which is these issues which are so endemic in our society. And here in the UK, we've had a spate of quite terrible homicides, which have once again reflected upon why it is they happen and what the root causes of these crimes are. And for too often, pretty much all the time, we always seem to focus on women's safety and how women can be made safer and what alarms we can give them and how much more street lighting we can give them. When of course the reality, as Ngunan just outlined to you, is the way to tackle this is to tackle male violence. And if you focus on the perpetrators or potential perpetrators, then ultimately you will keep women and girls safe. Now, in my career, 30 odd years of prosecuting and injustice, I've prosecuted more than 50 shades of violence against women and girls, everything from infanticide, feticide, early marriage, child marriage, FGM, forced marriage, honor-based abuse, homicides, you name it, and driven suicide. We men seem to find a catalogue of ways of being able to oppress and subjugate. And the purpose of today's session is to once again reflect upon why it is that we do that. And in fact, I'm glad you used the phrase earlier on, excuses. When we talk about culture or religion, which in the main are great forces for good, my religion doesn't define me, it refines me, it makes me a better person. And but unfortunately, there are lots of people out there, men generally, who will use religion and culture as a motivation in their minds, or an excuse. Certainly when they end up in court, they try and demonstrate that this is the reason why they did something, and this somehow takes away their own responsibility for what they did. The reality, of course, it doesn't. This comes down to your own individual responsibility, and you will turn culture and religion, or what your heritage or whatever it may be, as some kind of crutch upon which you will walk. And that you think will enable you to get away from receiving justice. The reality is that when people say it was cultural, or when they say it was religiously motivated, what they're actually saying is it's male power and male control. And that is what drives these behaviors. If it was, say, for example, honor, why is it that only the women of the family carry the honor on their shoulders? Why is it that, when I remember a father telling me that his son had been convicted of dealing in crack cocaine and was sent to prison for 6 years, and his daughter wanted to choose her own partner, and how much shame she was bringing to his family. The reality is that men and boys can do anything they like, but it's the women that carry the honor and so-called dishonor of their families. And I think that, again, explains what we're talking about, is that they will try and posit it, or give you some kind of narrative that somehow this is something more deep than it actually is. All it is about controlling women and controlling girls. And we've seen it catalogue, sadly, multiple times in the UK and across the world, where men have used their power to exert control over women and girls. And that means defining them. That means telling them what rights they can have and what rights they can't have. I thought the whole concept of universal rights was they applied to everybody. And I always say that, when it comes to culture, or we as societies need to be multiculturally sensitive. Yes, absolutely. But that does not mean that we must be morally blind. We've got to recognize that certain things cannot be done in the name of. We all have spent enormous amounts of times saying that person did this, and he said he did it in this name, and he said that he did it for religion or whatever it may be. He didn't. That's my religion. I don't want to blow up people. I don't want to kill people. I don't want to harm people. The reality is that these people will always use an excuse, and it'll be this excuse, which will ultimately be the one that the narrative that goes beyond the day's newspapers. And of course, it leads then to hate, because, the reality is that 99.99% of minorities in this country are absolutely law-abiding, but they will suffer the hate that's thrown upon them, inflicted upon them, because they are somehow, quote unquote, associated with somebody who has the same culture as them or the same religion as them. And that, I think, is something we've got to recognize. That therefore, that's why it's important to tackle it in the way the Savera have been doing and continue to do. And it must start, Savera works tirelessly in terms of education, in terms of educating young people about relationships and about rights, and at the same time providing support for victims and ultimately survivors to enable them to move on with their lives. And I think we've got to recognize that NGOs are at the forefront of the battle here. It shouldn't be, though, that NGOs are the only people fighting this battle. Time and time again, the bystander has a responsibility here. Time and time again, the government have a responsibility here. It always perplexes me that governments, and I'm not being party political here, but governments, seem to find very easy to focus on a particular crime and hope that it goes away and nobody thinks about it for another 6 months, so to enable men to carry on doing what they do. In the UK, one in every week, 2 women are killed in domestic abuse situations. 10 women will take their own lives every week in the UK because of domestic abuse. 1 in 4 women have suffered domestic abuse in the UK. 1 in 5 have suffered sexual assaults. 97% of women in a recent survey said they had been sexually harassed. That is the epidemic, the pandemic that will outlive this pandemic. And I think one has to recognize that if we've got an international response going on to tackle the COVID pandemic, where is the international response to tackle the pandemic that will outlive this pandemic? The oldest bigotry is misogyny. It started, for those of us of religion, in the Garden of Eden. So it's been going on that long, and yet for some reason we don't treat it with the seriousness that it needs to be treated with. So there's a work that has to happen at that governmental level, at the international level. There's work that has to happen at legislative level and at NGO level, and providing support to Savera and NGOs that are working tirelessly in this field and having to spend an enormous amount of their time, sadly, fundraising to just carry on doing their day jobs. And then there's work that has to happen in terms of education and providing young people with the skills to tackle the obstacles that they will face, and undoubtedly be brought to their attention and make them feel somehow that they are some lesser being. And that, I think, is a multi-pronged strategy that we know requires partnership. And that's why this conference today, or this evening session, is about partnership. That we can't do what we do here and then allow them to do what they. We had, for example, 12 murders in the name of honor last year. Half of them took place abroad. They were exported. The women were exported abroad to be murdered in the places where people originally the families came from. That requires, therefore, partnership and international working. But as I say, I am absolutely privileged to be working with Savera, to continue to work with Savera. I think it's really important that Savera gets the support that you have given it today, and the funds that continue to flow to enable them to do their work. But there's nothing more important than the work that the Savera NGOs across this country do. It's a shame that it falls to NGOs to do it, but the fact that they have to do it means that it requires us, you, me, and everybody else to provide them with 100% backing, despite the pain and suffering they will face, the attacks they will face for being in this space. And I have had the far right outside of my home, attacking my home because I've tackled far right terrorism. I am still 16 years on an Al-Qaeda death list because of the work I did tackling Islamist terrorism. The reality is there's a personal cost to leadership, and Savera, Afrah, and others will tell you that personal cost stays with you for life. But the only way we get through this is through networking, through supporting, and to realizing that what we are all doing is the right thing. Thank you very much indeed.
Nazir, don't go anywhere yet. I want to ask you a few questions because I know you've got to head off. And if there's anyone who would love to ask Nazir some questions, please put it in the Q&A chat box at the bottom. But I'm going to ask Nazir some questions myself. And equally, panelists, if you've got a question for Nazir, please do type it in as well. So Nazir, you've mentioned all the, what you do is a big job, and I can see why you're a patron for Savera. So what do you think, what are the main challenges and barriers when we are trying to fight culture-based violence and honor-based violence? What do you think are the main challenges?
I think the challenge remains the same for pretty much every area of life. They call it fake news now. They didn't call it fake news when I was growing up. Misinformation. The reason why, for example, a girl might think that she must be forced into marriage and her parents telling her that I will choose your partner for you is because she does not know that actually religion doesn't support that. The fact is that her culture does not permit that. So by providing information, access to information, people providing them with the support, the networks they need, you have to remember, Ngunan, that these are the most vulnerable people in society. And very often, I can paint, I've prosecuted more honor killings than anybody in the world. And I can point to cases, they're in my head. The names are, Shafidia or Sergi, they're all in my head. And the point is that they, very often, these young women or girls, whatever it was, they would go to the first person to seek help from. And that person didn't know what to do. So it's not just about educating the communities and educating individuals. It's also educating the systems, the authorities, everybody to understand that when they come across somebody, and there's Afrah will talk about it, we have this rule that, the first contact is the most important contact.
Yeah, yeah.
If they come to you, Ngunan, you can't say to somebody, come back tomorrow. When, I don't know, when Shafidia, when Samara went 10 a.m. to see her boyfriend and say to her boyfriend, please leave me, my parents would kill me. And he said, no, I can't. 2 hours later, she was stabbed to death in the presence of her infant nieces, was splattered with her blood. That's how quick people escalates. So if you don't move at pace, if you don't know what to do, then I'm afraid you're putting them in great danger.
I've got a question from Britt Gustawsson. So she says, if NGOs not working tirelessly to help fight in BAW, who would do it? How would government work to be able to tackle this problem in a meaningful way?
NGOs have the skill set, absolutely. They should be doing it, Britt, 100%. But you shouldn't be spending 50% of your life fundraising. Afrah spends the number of times that Afrah's you're all running a campaign to get some to be able to pay some salaries next month. To be able to pay for the tea and coffee at events or whatever it may be. That 50% of your time you're fundraising. If government properly funded you, you could be spending helping people and doing some educational work, etc., etc. So it's about making the greater use of NGO time. NGOs should do the work; they're the experts, but they shouldn't have to spend their lives fundraising.
And it kind of leads me on to Tahir's question. So Tahir says, what's the role of the education in school in tackling this issue?
I've had battles left, right, and centre. In the UK, we're now in different parts of the UK. We're introducing relationship education mandatorily in school. If a young person is not going to know what an abusive relationship is, what a good relationship is by chance. They either pick it up from their parents. I mean, when you're born, you know nothing. I mean, the only thing you hate when you're born is broccoli. You learn hate, you learn everything. And so the school and by my school, high school is too late. It's about kindergarten or primary school. The earlier you engage with young people and get them aware of relationships and rights and equality, all of those issues, the more likely it is that you will be able to change the mindset that ultimately would change society.
And it's funny you should say that, because when I worked at Radio Manchester, this is going back 2006, 2007, and there was an amazing charity that would go into primary schools to talk to young children about terrorism and things, because it was all to do with just tackling it from that bottom up, that giving that message about being British and what that means. And again, not to be political, when we got the Conservative government, they slashed all the funding, which meant they could no longer survive. Yeah. Now, if you look at the bombers that we've had and the young people who have gone over to Syria and Afghanistan to fight against the British, these young boys actually would have been the age that this organization was trying to tackle, trying to talk to. Fast forward 15, 20 years, and look at what's happened. So
it's more than that, because when a man beats a woman or rapes a woman, he has been radicalized to do that. Misogyny is a form of radicalization. So it's not just about radicalization for extremism and terrorism, that type of terrorism. In my book, I call it gender terrorism. The idea that you are misogynistic and you hate women and women should be treated and controlled, that's radicalization. So the work that you demonstrated, the work that you saw back in those schools in Merseyside, or wherever it was 15 years ago, that should be happening every day in our schools, and not being delivered by teachers, by the way. Teachers have got enough to deliver. They shouldn't be doing this between French and geography. There should be people who are experts in the field, the Afrahs, all the people on this panel, delivering in schools to people who are then going to be impacted by that and ultimately change their behaviors, and hopefully then change their parents' behaviors.
So we've got another question, and this one is about, so when a woman goes out, goes to a domestic abuse charity and cries for help, but then she backs off and says she doesn't want the help anymore, what then can be done? Because you can't force her to get that help, can you? So how do we...
There's two things we can do. One is that we're moving much closer to what we call victimless prosecutions now. So you prosecute cases without the need for that person, because there'll be other evidence. I'm afraid these men are really stupid generally. They'll be on Facebook, they'll be on Twitter, they'll be messaging, WhatsApping, telling their friends how they beat their wives and their girlfriends and how they messed about with that woman or raped that girl. There'll be other evidence, medical evidence, forensic evidence, you name it, which you can rely upon that doesn't need to put that woman through the trauma of a court proceeding. That's number one. Number two, though, is that we need to have the support mechanisms in place so that person, because the best evidence is her evidence, to put it bluntly, to give her the levels of support that will enable her to feel that this is the right thing to do, and make sure that that support doesn't end. One of the things that I always really concerns me, Ngunan, is that when a trial is finished, the case is finished, the circus leaves town, you know, and she is left for the rest of her life looking behind her, et cetera, et cetera. That support that she needs to get must be lifelong support. And it goes back to the point I made to Britt, that there has to be the funding in place to provide that lifelong support.
Another question from Tahir. So he says the Islamists, some time ago, the Islamists went with a petition against sex education, and, you know, he refused to support them. But he wasn't sure what, but he says, but I was not sure what my arguments against the petition was. So what's your advice?
Well, I was the one who dealt with that scenario back in Birmingham 2-3 years ago. You had these activists outside of primary schools screaming at children because they were concerned that the children were looking at books that had 2 male penguins with an egg. Oh my God, because that somehow, you know, so this is the kind of stuff that's happening. And I sat down with those activists because, you know, I was brought in to mediate, and at the end of the day, I couldn't mediate, so I went to court and got them injuncted. But the point I make is that what I said to them was this. They said, we don't want our children learning about the fact that gay people exist, right? I said, okay, so how would you feel if we said to the teachers, do not tell them that Muslims exist? You're not allowed to tell primary school kids that Muslims exist. They said, no, that's different. That's different. I said, how is that different? We need to prepare our children for the 21st century, not the 18th or the 17th, you know? So we've got to give them those kinds of tough messages. They had no answers, Ngunan, Tahir. They had no answers for that. But I'm pretty sure it was in their heads going, well, actually, he's right, isn't he? But we've got to remember that the haters and the bigots out there, at the end of the day, they're after anybody that's different. And if you are different, you should be an ally of somebody else who's different.
We've got another question. Oh, he says, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that, you know, when you mentioned about partnerships, I think that's really important, because I know growing up, there were girls that I went to school with, and as soon as they started their menstruation, they were going on holiday. Yeah. But we were 13, you know, so we didn't really understand that that holiday meant they were never coming back. So there's 3 girls that I, you know, were my friends, that they went on holiday. Until this day, I've never seen them again, because we didn't understand what that meant. Yeah. So if the school understood, and maybe the airport or transport knew what this could be, they probably could have stopped it.
But there's been some progress on that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's good news on this. A little bit of good news is that the airlines and the airports are much more aware now. There's this they're telling women and girls to put spoons in their knickers, so when they go through security, the alarm goes off and they're taken aside by a customs officer, and they can disclose, I'm about to be shipped out of the country and forced them out. You know, so there are ways now in which messaging can happen and delivered, and better understanding, absolutely. But we're still on a journey, and I've no doubt that today young girls are coming up to Christmas. Some will be going, if they could, because of COVID. Some will be going away, and you may never see them again. But then the other thing about bystanders, you know, the school may not know, but the friends in school should. They should be confident enough and supported enough to speak up and to say to somebody, I think my friend might be taken abroad, and then being able to action that. And we were the first country in the world to introduce the forced marriage unit, you know, which is there working internationally. The forced marriage unit, I used to say, was the nearest thing we had to a real James Bond. You know, they used to fly into India and Pakistan and bring these girls back from the villages. Unfortunately, the resources are so bad now, they couldn't fly into Liverpool, you know, but back in the day, they used to be able to do that kind of stuff. And, so we've got some good work, and we know what works. We just need to make it happen again.
Fantastic. Nazir, we know you have to leave us, but you've been amazing as always. So big
thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So without further ado, we have Britt Gustawsson from Zonta, London. So Britt, I will allow you to introduce yourself and what you do, your role, and how this partnership has even come about. And yeah, you're on mute, Britt.
Yes, I'm delighted to be here, first of all. And I have to say that the world needs more Nazir Afzals, and it would look very different. So I'm Britt Gustawsson. I'm Swedish, but I live in this country since 25 years. And I'm treasurer of Zonta London Club, and I'm also a member of the Zonta International Nominating Committee. So Zonta London is a part of Zonta International, a worldwide organization of 25,000 women and men, working at the international, national, and local levels to realize a vision of a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights, and that every woman is able to achieve her full potential, where women have access to all resources and are represented in all decision-making positions on an equal basis with men, and where women live in no fear of violence. For more than 100 years, Zonta International has contributed to help achieve a world free of violence against women and girls through service and advocacy. Violence against women and girls is one of the most pervasive human rights violations and a global pandemic, as Nazir said. Violence prevents women from contributing to their community and creating better lives for themselves and for their families. We advocate for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all aspects of life. We also support women's education through our scholarships, fellowships, and awards, and through our international service projects, which often include education of women and girls as key strategies. During the 16 days of activism, from 25th November to 10th December, Zontians all over the world take part in the Zonta Says No to Violence Against Women and Girls campaign to influence the making and implementation of laws, as well as change in gender-based attitudes and behaviors to end violence against women. We are delighted to be partnering again with Savera UK in a campaign during this period to amplify voices on the issue of violence against women and demonstrate our commitment through the Orange the World and UN 60 Days of Activism. Child marriage is a global pandemic, and it's recognized as a harmful practice and a human rights violation. Despite laws against it, the practice remains widespread and found in cultures, religions, ethnicities, and countries around the world. Globally, 21% of girls are married before they are 18, robbing them of their childhood. We work with UN partners UNICEF and UNFPA to end child marriage in some of the highest prevalence countries, while our Zonta clubs and members advocate for the end of these human rights violations in their own countries. Ending child marriage requires addressing over a period of time the complex socio-cultural and structural factors underpinning the practice. Culture is no excuse for abuse, and Zonta, with its 1,100 clubs in 63 countries, is well placed to get that message across by holding events to create awareness of early and forced marriage and its consequences. Zonta International is taking action to end this practice locally, nationally, and globally. To be successful, we believe in creating and expanding opportunities for the empowerment of adolescent girls, improve literacy and provide girls with information about sexual reproductive health, financial competencies, gender equality, and building healthy relationships, and to help adolescent girls enroll and remain in schools. We believe in and are engaging with men and boys in gender equality work, challenging toxic masculinities and empowering them to become agents of positive change. We believe in and are engaging families, communities, traditional and religious leaders, and other influencers in dialogue and consensus building programs on alternatives to child marriage. We provide technical support to governments in order to help them enact, enforce, and uphold laws and policies that are in line with international human rights standards and aimed at preventing child marriage. That we are on the right track was made clear when some weeks ago, Zonta International was one of 6 associations to receive the 2021 Power of Summit Award, the American Society of Associations' highest honor for the association community at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. Zonta International was recognized for its efforts to end child marriage. Mansi Mehta from UNICEF here will tell you more about the global program to end child marriage, where Zonta International has partnered with UNICEF and UNFPA since 2018. Zonta, the global program's first private sector donor, has contributed $3.5 million so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Britt. I love that. There's so much I want to ask you, but we'll wait until the end when it's time for Q&A. And again, if anyone has questions, please put them in the Q&A chat box, and yeah, and we'll definitely get through to them. Thank you again, Britt. Mansi Mehta next from UNICEF. Take the stage.
Thanks so much, Ngunan. Thank you, Britt, also. I want to start by just saying thank you. Thank you for asking me to be here. It's such a privilege to speak among such esteemed panelists and raise awareness about an issue that is so important globally, but also is very deeply personal to me as well. So thanks to Savera UK, thanks to Zonta Club of London. And I'm proud to say that UNICEF and Zonta International have been partners for approximately 50 years now, and UNICEF has been around for 75. So I think that speaks volumes to how much the partnership is valued from UNICEF's perspective. In my role as Deputy Director, I work to build partnerships with organizations, primarily civil society organizations, whose mission and vision align with that of UNICEF and that of UNICEF USA, where every child has the opportunity not only to survive, but we want to ensure that they're thriving as well. So with that, I work with women's organizations, with faith-based organizations, professional and like-minded organizations to support children, women, and girls around the world. So I'll talk to you a bit about the global program to end child marriage, which is what Britt touched on just a bit in her intro remarks. Child marriage is essentially, by definition, is the marriage before the age of 18 and is globally recognized as a harmful practice, a human rights violation, and yet despite there being laws against it, the practice remains widespread and can be found, as we know, and as the topic of discussion here, can be found in cultures and religions, ethnicities, and countries around the world, including developed countries. And as you heard Britt mention, globally, 21% of girls are married while they are still children, which essentially steals away the beauty of their childhood. And so when a girl is forced to marry, we know there's enough data that, her odds of finishing school decrease. Her odds of experiencing domestic violence, on the other hand, increase. She's more likely to become pregnant during adolescence, contract HIV/AIDS, to die young due to complications during pregnancy and childbirth. Of the estimated 650 million girls and women that are alive today who are married before the age of 18, South Asia is home to 40%, and Sub-Saharan Africa follows with 18% of the global total. There is some good news here. The good news is that child marriage has declined around the world. There are about 25 million child marriages that have been prevented. Unfortunately, this remarkable accomplishment and the progress that we've achieved has kind of taken a pause, and it's hit a point of being threatened because of COVID-19. So COVID-19 has really upended the lives of children, all children, adolescents, families across the globe, and has unfortunately adversely affected programs to end child marriage. So to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the statistics behind that, we know that because of the pandemic, an additional 10 million girls are at risk of becoming child brides before the end of the decade. child marriages that otherwise would have been prevented or averted. So thus, in 2016, UNICEF and the United Nations Populations Fund, or UNFPA, joined forces to launch what we now call the Global Program to End Child Marriage. The program uses tested strategies to really bring together various partners and key stakeholders, such as governments, civil society, families, young people, faith leaders and communities in this collective effort to prevent girls from marrying too young and to support those girls that may already be married. In 2020 alone, the global program reached over 4 million adolescent girls. Both UNICEF and UNFPA understand that ending child marriages require addressing what Britt touched on, these complex socio-cultural and structural factors that really underpin the practice over a period of several years. So knowing that this is sort of a life cycle and can impact a young girl, an adolescent for years to come, the global program was then designed to cover the 15-year period from 2016 to 2030. So during this time, the priority will remain on really engaging girls as key agents of change in the following 12 countries. And these 12 countries are the countries which have the highest prevalence of child marriage. They are Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Ghana, India, Mozambique, Nepal, Niger, Sierra Leone, Uganda, Yemen, and Zambia. I do want to add that, you know, Zonta International is the only private sector and women-led investor who's supporting this program, in addition to the governments of Belgium, Canada, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. So the primary focus of this program is really focusing on what is a gender transformative approach to ending child marriage, promoting skills for adolescent girls and social protection for families, engaging men and boys in the conversations from the very beginning, in sort of that social and gender transformation, which really can be powerful. I think that, you know, addressing child marriage, which is often conflated with cultural and religious practices and beliefs, requires recognizing the factors behind what causes child marriages in the first place. So the roots of the practice, of course, vary from country to country. Their cultures, the poverty, the lack of educational opportunities, but also the access to the education, access to the limited healthcare, which often perpetuate the need, or often caretakers and parents think that one of the only solutions to support their young daughter is to marry her off so that in the short term they receive financial aid. Some families think of it as ridding their economic burden, or a way to earn that income. And others do so because they believe it will secure their daughters' futures or protect them. And norms and stereotypes around gender roles and marriage are also part of the socioeconomic risk, including pregnancy outside of marriage. And of course, we know that even though it's embedded into the sort of system, if there's a law that's prohibiting child marriage, doesn't necessarily mean that child marriage is not happening. And so that component of making sure, what we call at UNICEF, boots and suits, you need to have people on the ground doing the actual work, speaking with the religious leaders, speaking with communities. They also need to work with policymakers and legislation to make sure that there is some policy in place to be able to do the implementation on the ground. So UNICEF's playing a few different key roles here, which is developing the legislation and working with the governments and other civil society organizations on the ground, improving access to services for adolescent girls, including having a safe space for them to go to, getting that sort of psychosocial support when and if they do turn to somebody to go to for help. and influencing gender and social norms, which I think is one of the most difficult things when it's so deeply rooted into the society that these young girls are growing up into and born into. I will say that to date, the global program has engaged 39 million individuals in community-based behavior change and sensitization activities. And so this could be anything from, especially during the pandemic, when the ability to access communities or the young women was extremely difficult, going around in mobile vans and using radios, using sort of speaker phones in the community to talk about the sort of access that young girls still had. It's very interesting because even though there might not be clean water in a community, but often people have access to phones. And so when they have the access to their cell phones, UNICEF uses what we call U-Report, which is a digital platform which will enable a young girl or someone else in the community to say, hey, there's someone here that needs help. And then a group of activists will go out and support the community, talk to the religious leaders. Sometimes the faith leader has such a powerful hold on the community. And so speaking to them and talking about the negative impacts that child marriage has will then in turn support the community itself, which, that's one of UNICEF's key goals in working with traditional leaders and faith-based leaders on the ground. And I think, I do want to end with saying that because of Zonta's support, currently we are in phase 2 of the 3-pronged phased approach. The first phase focused on really sort of the foundational change of attitudes and behaviors. The second is focusing on increasing political support, access to resources, gender responsive policies and frameworks. And also accelerating that sort of action to end child marriage in investing in this, which, as you heard earlier, you need to do the fundraising piece of this. Without the funds, you cannot actually be doing the programmatic work on the ground. And the third phase of this, which will be sort of the longer term goal that we have in place here, which is really to ensure that adolescent girls fully enjoy childhood free from the risk of marriage. And the priorities for this 2021, 2022 and beyond is really understanding how this pandemic has impacted programming on the ground and ensuring that moving forward there is this pandemic sensitive programming in place, and promoting gender equity through actual skill development for adolescent girls and engaging boys and girls and men at the forefront as well. So I will pause there since I've been talking for quite a while and turn it back over to Ngunan.
Thank you so much, Mansi. There's a few questions, so I can't wait to get you to answer them later on. Can we move on to Dr. Elham Manea, please? Take the stage.
Thank you very much. I thought I will use an approach where I talk about my motivation for what I'm doing. That means the private, the individual, and then from there talk about my work. So I'm a Yemeni Swiss academic and a woman rights defender. And I would basically start by asking the question, what makes a person? What drives her to be the person she became known for? Sometimes I wonder, would I have been the same if it wasn't for the eyes of my mother? The silent echoes of her eyes have haunted me all my life. If it wasn't for those echoes, I wouldn't have written Echoes, Sad al-Anin, my first Arabic novel. Would I have been someone different if it wasn't for the voice of my father? Just like my mother, he talked long with me about life, death, culture, religion, and the freedom of the human's will. His idea of playing with me as a child was to recite a part of a poem. I had to start a new one with the last letter of his part. I loved his games and I loved his voice. My mother's stories were different. Hers were formed by pain. Pain of being a girl, circumcised, mutilated at 8. Pain by being cursed by her beauty and therefore married off by her father at the age of 13. Better to marry her early and make her the trust of another man, a burden of honor to discard with. And pain by the stories of women she knew, painful stories, always shaped and connected to man. Man was not to be trusted. Man inflicts only pain. But then I had a man for a father, and I loved him. He was my hero. Over time, I learned how to make a story complete by looking at the different aspects of it. To hear my mother's stories would not be complete without hearing the voices of my father and all the men involved. Over the time, I started to recognize the harm caused by injustice and discrimination, but situate them within the social context that causes them, the structures. To change that social context means to look at these structures. Culture can certainly be beautiful. In the literature, poems, music, food, and the warmth of social bonds. But it is often used as an excuse for abuse. Culture can be used to harm. A girl is less valued than a boy, a source of shame. Her body and sexuality are to be controlled. She should be controlled. A perpetual minor. These are cultural values and norms that lead to harm. FGM, child marriage, forced marriage, and misery. Over time, I started to understand that to end discrimination and injustice, one has to fight for human rights. Nothing comes from inaction. Rights have to be taken, and change can only happen if you demand it, if you took a stand. Taking a clear stance against violations of human rights requires action, and writing has been my way of breaking the wall of silence. I breathe through words and write in 3 forms, literally, research, and opinion articles. But I will focus here on the second form, research. I believe social science has an important social function. And as a researcher, try to investigate reality to learn the system and roots of our problems and how best to change and reform. A political scientist, I prefer to look at the context of the phenomenon under investigation and from there draw the patterns that can explain it. And this approach necessitates field research in the MENA region, in Europe, and in South Africa. And it has allowed me to see how cultural norms shape our laws. I will give you an example. In Article 40 of Yemeni family law, listen, I come from Yemen, so I'm speaking about a family law. A wife, and I'm quoting here, a wife owes her husband obedience, especially in the following 4 cases. He chooses the place of residence. She fulfills his sexual desires. She follows his orders and undertakes her domestic chores, and she is not to leave her marital residence without his permission. Now, this is a reading of Islamic law that was formulated by male jurists between the 7th and 10th century. So naturally, it reflects its own historical context and the prevalent gender-biased cultural norms. Just try to remember how women were treated between the 7th and 10th century in Europe and the United States, and how the laws look like. So while I understand that this type of Islamic law was shaped by its history, what I found astonishing is that we apply it today in our family laws. Astonishment aside, we need to understand the structures that allowed these laws to continue to govern family laws in most of Middle East and North African countries with few exceptions, Tunisia and Morocco among them. This was the focus of my postdoctoral thesis published later in 2011 with the title The Arab State and Women's Rights, the Trap of Authoritarian Governance. In this study, I highlighted how the features of the Arab state, especially its traditional base of power and politics of survivor, made it reluctant to change the religious basis of these family laws. You may be telling yourself by now, oh, but that is the story of overseas countries, the Middle East and North Africa. This has nothing to do with us here in the United Kingdom. Well, I suggest you think again. This biased, archaic reading of Islamic law, which shapes the lives of women, that very article of the Yemeni law that I just mentioned before, a wife owes her husband obedience, she fulfills his sexual desires, etc., etc. This mentality with its norms do in fact exist in the UK. It exists in the norms prevalent in some closed communities in the UK. And these norms include, and I'm just citing right now, from some reports of women organizations working within closed communities, rigidly defined matrimonial roles, the belief that the duty of women is to maintain the family izzat, honor, that they are the barriers of community and family honor. They can bring sharam, that is shame, on their families and extended kin. Often they endure social control that borders on locking up girls and women. Norms where violence and physical abuse towards young women continue to be a community-sanctioned method of controlling their independence. It also exists in the type of Islamic law being applied in UK Sharia councils and Muslim arbitration laws, something I researched and published about in my book, Women in Sharia Law, The Impact of Legal Pluralism in the UK. Some women continue to be ruled by these provisions and norms today, here in the UK. We can be outraged, but without understanding the reasons why women turn to these Sharia councils, the extremist ideology that mainstreamed them, without breaking the silence within closed communities, and without holding the British state accountable for the violation taking place. It has a responsibility of protection. Discrimination will continue, and abuse will continue to be excused by culture. This has to stop, and for this to stop, we need to act by breaking the wall of silence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Elham Manea. So last and certainly not least of our panelists is CEO of Savera UK, Afrah Qassim.
Thanks, Ngunan. And thanks, Mansi and Elham. That's just like an amazing into the event today. What I want to start about today is just wanted to take a moment talking about the 16 days of activism that was started on the 25th. And what went is, sadly, on that day of our starting the activism, 2 women was killed in the hand of a man. So it's just, so to say, so our campaign, it can't be much important when these things are happening. We know that they exist, but I think around also talking about culture and talking about how it's used to excuse this kind of abuse is really important, that we continue to tackle those. And I need to echo what Nazir said, what Mansi said, what Britt said, what Elham says, around highlighting the beauty of culture and the beauty of celebrating our identity and our background. And similar to Elham, I'm from a Yemeni heritage that I am so proud of, and that makes me the person I am today, an identity. I'm also adopting the British culture and adopting my Irish heritage, because my stepmother is Irish. So there is so many cultural things that we need to celebrate, we need to be proud of, and we need to really tell, but we need to ensure and let everyone do not yet use culture as an excuse for that kind of abuse. These are nothing to do with culture, nothing to do with abuse, because if it is, everything will be very the norms, and we need to start kind of really calling them out as abuse, as violation against women and girls, honor-based abuse, false marriage, child marriage, breast timing, and many more other forms of abuse that many use that culture to justify. So we need to really differentiate between actually culture is a celebratory culture and abuse. This is a violation against our human rights and our choices, and we must stop hiding behind it. And fear of being discriminated or being called racist. These are obligations safeguarded. There's nothing to do around being discriminating against somebody to safeguard somebody, or being racist to safeguard a life. And that is what is Savera all about. What is Savera is committed to challenge, and its mission is around that. And just give me one example of some of the work that we challenge on a daily basis, where a family fully controlled their 15-year-old around picking her and taking her to school, controlling her, and monitoring her at all times, 24/7. Not allowing her to mix with friends, not allowing her to dress by the choice that she wanted to dress, not allowing her to continue with her education and with her school. And these happen here in the UK, as Elham said. It does not just happen in the wealthier country. These happen here. These are some of the cases that Savera have on a daily basis. By challenging professionals and keeping saying to them, you need to deal with it. No, it's their culture. It's nothing to do with us. I don't think it's honor-based abuse. We're just making judgments. These kind of the comments that we have on a daily basis, and we continue to challenge and continue to, and that is the reason Savera behind it. I hope one day is that Savera does not exist because these issues no longer exist. But while these issues exist, we will be here to campaign and challenge until people really understand the difference between what is actually culture and what is actually those harmful practices is, and what's the importance of saving God and saving a life, because that is our responsibility. If we take a role there within statutory organisations, within professional around saying that we're working with vulnerable people, that we're working with to support those individuals, is to encourage them, is to empower them, is to give them that we have a choice to choose. And especially and mostly in this Western European, when we in school learn about independence, learn about choice, learn about freedom, and then we go home and we were told completely different. And I am a person who, I was lucky enough to have choices, to make mistakes, and to learn and to build from those mistakes, because my parents allowed me to do that. Despite all that, I was lost between two cultures, between the Western culture and my own culture, because I wanted to fit in with my culture, but I wasn't fitting in because I was seen as Westernized. But then I wasn't seen as Westernized by my friend who's Westernized, because I was seen, I like spicy food, or like to dress in a different kind of my own clothes. So I wasn't seen, or I wasn't drinking with them or going partying until early hours. So I wasn't fit in that category as well. So I was lost in between two cultures. And it took me a long time to see what exactly does Afrah is, who is actually Afrah is, and what does Afrah want to be seen as. Is it about me as my own choice and freedom that I needed, or is it by somebody telling me this is how you should look like, this is how you should say, this is how you should behave? We really need to, education in school is so vital, so important. We need to do more of it, and we need to make this more part of the curriculum to give those choices, to give those opportunities to young people to learn about themselves and give them the opportunity and the choices is so important. So just wanted to kind of make that. And I think committing to work around speaking out around part of Orange the World is just as important of highlighting. It's really so proud and so honored to have you as part of the panel to talk about this issue and to talk. And I think we need to talk more about the culture and tradition and the difference between those harmful practices. And I just want to finish as well, it's part of the stories that we collected. Our survivor is so important. Their voices, we want their voices to be heard. We want to hear and we want to hear how their experience and how the challenges they face. And as part of some of the Savera UK story workshop, that actually lucky enough to have a friend and a colleague such as Ngunan, who worked with our survivors and develop those and work and empower them to write their own stories. And part of those stories is they wanted to share with you today, and we have put them in a animation films, and that is their story. This is what they have written, but it was read by Savera UK's team and volunteers. So we'll show you the films now. Nikki.
Rania is a woman from South Asia who was in London at the beginning of the story. At that time, she was 25 years old and had been disowned by her family for marrying against their wishes. Soon after the marriage, she discovered her husband already had 2 wives with children. Within a year, Rania's love match broke down into abuse. After a violent incident at home, the police were called by neighbours. Her husband was arrested and the police took Rania to the Home Office to seek support. From there, she was sent to a hostel where she was able to apply for asylum. She was supported by Savera UK and has found the help necessary to carry on. Rania felt the police were on her side and really cared. They also communicated her situation well. Rania feels safe now, despite the threat to her life from her in-laws and her own family. She says, "At least I can live."
Tinu is a single mum to 2 amazing teenage boys. She came to the United Kingdom from Nigeria to seek protection from domestic violence, child abuse, and to stop harmful practices from being perpetrated to her kids. She was left with no option than to seek protection for her and her boys. Her kids have always loved to be professional footballers, and true to their dreams, her youngest son was scouted by 2 UK Premier League football clubs. Tinu had never wished for anything than to see her sons be happy again after all the trauma that they had been through. Tears of joy rolled from their eyes when they were told he was scouted. But their dream began to fall apart when her son was denied the opportunity to be a trialist for the clubs because of his status as an asylum seeker. She asked the scout, was the trial a show of status or was it a show of talent? He couldn't say a word. Her son at first stopped training, so Tinu asked his grassroots coach to keep encouraging him. She and her son also watched videos of footballers who had made it to see what they went through for motivation. Tinu believes it is not over until it's over. Her son is back to training now and says that it is the club's losses. Tinu wants to encourage people in similar situations not to give up. She says, "I know our dream will come through someday and there is always hope for the living."
When Anna received a generous scholarship for a joint degree in Women's and Gender Studies to be completed in an EU country and the UK, she was ecstatic. She was excited to leave her abusive in-laws' home and once again pursue her aspirations that she had to let go of because of her forced marriage. But in the host EU country, she faced roadblocks, discrimination, and abuse. She felt she had stepped into the fire from the frying pan. In the eyes of local policies, Anna was a non-entity as a student and parent. She was looked down upon for giving into motherhood by many women she met. Her interactions with most people were coloured by their assumptions that she was a refugee because of the colour of her skin and her hijab. Domestic violence and divorce combined with destitution and homelessness through the pandemic resulted in her arriving in the UK as an asylum seeker. Anna was apprehensive. Merseyside, however, has been very different for Anna. Here, people have been kind, generous, and welcoming. The UK is more open to the idea of student parents, with many universities providing services including family-friendly housing for those students. Most of all, people don't make her feel like a lesser human, and if they find out you are an asylum seeker, they tend to be supportive and understanding. Looking back on her time in Europe, Anna says, "I only survived that time through the power of other women's friendship and the kindness of individuals in a largely unsympathetic environment."
That's so powerful, and it's weird because I know I worked with the women, but just seeing it, how it's being illustrated, it really is powerful. So yeah, we have now it's time for questions. So I'm going to use the Q&A box, and if anyone, I mean, we've got lots of people who are who've zoomed in, so please do ask questions. I'm going to start with the first one. So this is for you, Britt. How do you deal with child marriage in fragile and vulnerable countries like Syria and Yemen? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, I think that the question should probably be put to Mansi. So Zonta International is an international organization. We don't do the work. We are professionals. So we are partnering with the organizations like UNICEF and UNFPA, who are on the ground where the action is. We are supportive, we are visiting, we are doing trips every year, but we don't have the in-depth knowledge that UNICEF has about the project. We do get reports on a regular basis, of course, so we are completely aware of what's going on. But I think that the question should be put to Mansi instead of to me. She would know much better.
Yes, please, Mansi.
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. And I think, you know, Britt, you addressed part of it, but Yemen is actually one of the countries that I mentioned. It's that the global program to end child marriage is working in Yemen because it's one of the countries that has one of the highest prevalence rates of child marriage. So similar to, you know, addressing, so UNICEF takes sort of a multifaceted approach. One is, of course, working, we're apolitical, so working with the government and trying to ensure that no matter what the political beliefs of the current government in place, that we are working together to ensure that there are policies in place, but working on the ground directly with local NGOs. So once UNICEF receives the funds, UNICEF actually then works to allocate and disperse those funds together with these stakeholders, so these civil society organizations, working with community leaders, so whether that's faith leaders, whether that's women leaders who are also survivors of child marriage or who have done quite a bit of advocacy in their communities, working and engaging with men as well. Those are some of the ways in which UNICEF is working to tackle these issues within Yemen, but within Syria. Syria is a little bit more complicated. We only have access in certain areas of the country. And so once people are coming in to, as internally displaced people, into parts of Europe and to other areas of the world, we're working directly on the ground with them as well. But our primary partners are the government and local NGOs.
Thank you, Mansi. We've got another question. So UNICEF has huge data on child marriage and child trafficking, but is unsure how to access this data for educational purposes. Could you advise on if that's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we actually develop every year for Zonta, we call it our Global Program to End Child Marriage Toolkit. And I'm happy to share that via Britt with you after this session is over. And that highlights all of the statistics in a more condensed way. So it's a little bit easier to navigate.
Fantastic, thank you. Elham, for you, the law in Yemen, or the absence of, is making the situation for Yemeni women worse. How can the researchers like yourself reach Yemeni women when they suffer already from brutal war for the last 7 years?
It's a very good question, and I'm really glad for the answer of Mansi about UNICEF presence in Yemen, because it's one of the very few organizations that is actually working on the ground, and that is very important, specifically with a war that is raging and that exacerbated the situation and the problems of Yemen. Yemen have been at the bottom ladder when it comes to the gender gap index, and that's a position that remains since 13 years. How do we reach out as a researcher? I've been working lately also on issue of gender in Yemen, in addition to other, because, you know, I'm working also on the Yemeni civil war. But it's, again, just like Mansi mentioned, through those who are working inside the country, you have a resilience that should be looked at by women organization, by women on a local levels, and how they are basically trying to make a difference. And from my side, it's like I'm doing my research, but at the same time, I see also other civil society actors outside of Yemen who are trying more or less to gather also support for NGOs and their efforts on the ground. One is tomorrow, for instance, we are launching the reading of a new book about, it's poetry written by Yemenis to show the cultural heritage of youth, men and women, translated into German, but the money that we are gathering will be also giving to NGOs working with girls, working with children. So I think we're doing, when it comes to this, it's a very difficult situation. And I'm glad that UNICEF exists, and I'm glad for the Yemeni civil society actors who are working on the ground for the benefit of women and for children, boys and girls, both.
Oh, thank you so much. Afrah, what would you advise a professional who suspects harmful practices but has concerns about being labelled as making racist assumptions? And I think this is a very important question because schools are very nervous about this.
Yeah, I think that's quite a lot of that is one question that I get, especially when I deliver training or session, and we also get like a call into our helpline around people really concerned and worried about if they kind of become aware or somebody come asking for them and they kind of have to challenge it without feeling racist. I think if they have that worried and that concern, they really need to contact an organization that can seek support and advise and go through what their concern are. and how they, and then we can kind of work with them and how to tackle it. My most views is Savera UK, I think Nazir tried to kind of mention it before, is we promote the one chance rule. And if we miss that one chance rule, that means we miss the life. So if there is any assumption, sometimes we say, I'd rather be safe than sorry, because you can apologize for a mistake, but you can't apologize for a life lost. So I would advise them to go and seek advice and support if they can, from somebody, and consider it as finding out where to go or how to go about it. And it depends on the situation as well. It's kind of difficult to know what exactly the case is and how they're going about it. Sometimes it's how you ask the question rather than actually being that racist. We need to be curious to try and find out the issues.
And are they okay to get in contact with Savera for advice?
Yeah, we have a helpline. And I think Nikki and Lauren will be putting it in the chat to, if people concerned or worried, we're always happy to support and work with anybody when they have a concern, because that's what they're for to help.
Brilliant. Go another one, Mansi. Due to COVID, child marriage has definitely increased. Do you think this is the case?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, COVID-19 obviously came completely out of the blue. And one of the statistics that we've collected in the past year is an additional 10 million girls are at risk of becoming child brides before the end of the decade. And it also forced delays in programming. I mean, that money would have been otherwise used to support this program had to reshift and pivot to focusing on the emergency instead for a while, which is also, just because there's an emergency doesn't mean that child marriages are going to end. Actually, they increase. So yes, I would say definitely.
Thank you for that answer. So this is for the whole panel. What steps can people take on an individual level to tackle misconceptions around connection between culture and abuse? So I don't know who wants to go first. Elham, I see you smiling, so I'm coming to you.
No, I just thought it's just with more knowledge, because sometimes you hear the argument, this is the culture, this is what religion is saying, and you can basically show through knowledge, through facts, that actually that's not the case. Actually, you can see that this culture and this tradition is being differently interpreted and applied in different countries. So it's not made of stone, So knowledge, more knowledge, and at the same time expose that very often what we're talking about when it comes to how to treat women in certain close community is very much an outcome of a fundamentalist reading of a religion, regardless of which religion I'm talking about here. But it's very important that we also understand that we have to fight extremism within us. And because that extremism is the one that pushes for a certain kind of radicalized treatment of women. So knowledge and also breaking the wall of silence.
And you know what, Elham, it's good that you said that, because there's certain countries that use Christianity and use the Bible, to abuse women. There's countries that will use the Torah or the holy book, and has been used in so many different ways to put down women. So it's when we talk about knowledge, a lot of people use what they class as the old teachings, to abuse women in so many different ways, but they only want to be selective as well in that teaching, Britt, do you have anything you'd like to add to that as well?
Yes, I would like to say that, we believe strongly in education, educating young girls and boys, educating community leaders, religious leaders, and others. It's a long way to go, but I think we will only make a real change by educating people.
Completely. Mansi?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think that, you know, it's extremely important to find the right faith leaders who can speak on behalf of these beliefs. And actually, there's an organization called Arigato International, and it's a panel of these wonderful faith leaders that are against violence against children, against sexual exploitation. And I think that once we bring their voices to the forefront as well, I mean, it's just so powerful to have them speaking about the importance of not doing female genital mutilation or not, you know, oppressing women and girls. And so I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you, Mansi. Afrah?
Yeah, I think just to add about it, I think also it's the misinformation about those cultural belief and religion belief, because what I understand of culture and believe that I might tell somebody, it might be completely different to someone else. So I think it's just needed to always questions what actually is those belief and what is actually those culture and where safeguarding stand, because sometimes somebody might understand it different to another. And I think it's just explore that knowledge and always able to question those people who think, oh, this is my culture and this is my religion or belief. Because I know when somebody asks me, what's your religion, I can say to them, I'm a Muslim, but am I practicing Muslim or different? Or like, what is it? You can be Sunni, you can be Salafi, can be Shia. So it's very different values. So I think it's always is questioning and being able to question as well, and the knowledge, and it's understanding those wide and very diverse culture. That's why it makes honor-based abuse and those kind of issues so complex when we deal with it.
And that's so true, you know, and sometimes you do find a case where the people who are practicing that, what they class as that culture or that religion, actually have never been back to, say, you know, like say parts of West Africa or, you know, North, they've never been back, you know, but what they've been, it's passed down information that has been diluted or, you know, heightened in some cases, you know. So yeah, this is another question for the whole panel, from Nancy. How do we harness what we have learned from this excellent discussion and turn it into action?
Yeah, I love that question.
Yeah.
I think that one is, first of all, having conversations like this are extremely important, but supporting organizations that you believe in, like Savera UK, like Zonta, like UNICEF, who are doing the work on the ground and really believe in the mission. When I say mission, I mean, I believe in children, not necessarily just UNICEF, but women and girls. So funding, raising your voice. In the US, I'll speak on behalf of the United States since I'm from the US, but we have an advocacy initiative where we're working to write legislation to policymakers. We're calling them on a regular basis. Zonta USA is part of our advocacy initiative to have advertisements and billboards in place with helplines for if you think that someone is, you know, threatened to be married off, you know, here's the helpline that you can call. Here's some resources. And so awareness, advocacy, and education, I think, are the biggest pieces here that are ways to take action.
Would anyone else like to follow up from Mansi?
I think I'll just add. I think Mansi has mentioned it all. I think if everyone take an action and a responsibility, and just breaking those silence, not to have those fear of asking the question and speaking out about those issues, and not saying it's their culture, it's their kind of belief, so I'm going to stay quiet. I think we need to really start calling this as an abuse, and not to have those excuses any longer, because it's gone past that excuse, and we start taking responsibilities. Particularly, I would sign is to those professionals who deal with those vulnerable individuals on a day-to-day basis, is not to pick and choose. I'm not going to do much because of them, because of their language, not understanding the system, or not, you know, kind of, they don't know what's their right or what their choice. We are a responsible individuals as professionals. We need to give our best response to somebody who needs our help and our support.
Yeah.
So if I can say, I was going to mention that for those who are on this webinar, who are not from Zonta or from Savera or another organization, I think one thing that everybody can do is actually to join an NGO. And because you heard what Nazir said, that, you know, the NGOs are the ones that should do the job. The government should fund them. Well, they don't, but they should. So everybody can help by joining an NGO that works in a specific field, either as we are an international organization that works in many fields to support women. There are organizations that work particularly for FGM or child marriage as well, or anything else. So I think that's something that everybody can do, get engaged with an NGO. Thank you.
So this next question, it's all to do with, you know, we talked about, you know, people passing on knowledge and fake news and all these fake knowledge, fake education. So it's again for the whole panelists. So fake news is in full use and abused by social media. How can we respond to queries, but also differentiate between fake news and facts? It's a tough question. It is a tough question.
It's a tough question. It's really a tough question.
Because we, you know, from a media perspective, a lot of our work, I'd say the past 5 years especially, has been around fake news. And our target countries are India, Nigeria, and Kenya, you know, where people are using, you know, WhatsApp, and, you know, and it's sad how this, you know, violence can be incited just from using WhatsApp. So a lot of us now are trying to fight this. But again, there's a lot of journalists, you know, in the States, in the UK, in parts of Africa, in parts of it, who are trying to fight this. So maybe answering the question as I'm talking is maybe that there's more partnerships between NGOs and journalists, trusted journalists and media organizations that can help tackle, you know, culture-based violence and misinformation. And so I think that's one of the reasons why me and Savera work so closely together, is making sure that we are training people and educating people on how to own their stories, own their narratives, and just making sure that we can spread, you know, what's going on, and educate people. So yeah, I think we need more partnerships between people like us journalists who understand how to fight fake news, as well as working closely with NGOs to support you guys to be able to pass that on as well and help you in the fight. So yeah. Diane says maybe we need to learn from the US partnership about how to do more public awareness. Afrah, what do you think?
Yeah, I welcome any new creativity to engage with communities and different groups, that particularly the prevalence, where honor-based abuse and FGM and forced marriage are more prevalent. Those definitely welcome any partnership. We always welcome those new learning and difference that we can more motivation. Yeah.
I love that. So yeah, we have come to the end. It's been an absolutely beautiful discussion. I've enjoyed, and I'm sure everyone who's zoomed in has enjoyed it as well. Thank you to all our speakers, our panelists. It's always insightful, but also it gets the juices flowing. And every time we have a Savera event, we always come away thinking we can do more. There's always more that we can do, and there's more, joined up work that can happen. So yeah, let's keep it moving, and let's keep fighting girl power.
And thank you all for the wonderful work you're doing. I'm
Yes.
really, Savera and everybody, thank you. UNICEF, you just basically thank you.
I'll echo that. I just want to say thank
Zonta,
you.
sorry.
I can't believe I'm sitting on a panel with such a wonderful, esteemed speaker as all of you. So I'm just grateful to have been part of this. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everyone and thank the partnership, and thank the audience who joined, and they're always support. There's many of them who's always there to support Savera, but also I think thank our funders and supporters, because without our funders and those who commissions the work, that Savera wouldn't have exist here. But mostly I want to thank Savera's team for their motivation, for their commitment with such limited resources. We are a very, very small, people think we're 100. We are actually about just 7 members of the team. That's it. So we're not many of us. And I just want to finish with thanks to Nikki and Lauren, who has headed this campaign for the last 6 months, and it's been a challenge for them trying to do that. So thank you for them as well. It's lovely, everyone.
I'm sorry. So I would like to thank Savera for actually partnering with us. You have done an amazing job, I have to say. Nikki, particularly, I think, in holding us together for this event. And I would also like to thank Mansi for actually joining us. That was really very nice of you to come along and tell us all about the projects in your own words. And finally, I would like to thank Ngunan for taking us through this on a rather short notice, I think. So very well done, everybody.
Thank you very much. And yeah, everyone stay in touch, and Savera's details are in the chat as well. So enjoy the rest of your evening.